Have you ever thought about what it would have been like to journey with Jesus? I'm not talking about a spiritual metaphor here. If I was, I suspect that many or most of you could answer, yes, that's my life. I'm actually talking about the historical Jesus and what it would have been like to be one of his first followers, following him around Galilee and later Judah. As a part of the 21st century, I am well aware that my first century historical imagination lacks accuracy. And that makes me hesitant most of the time to project my own expectations onto the stories. And yet, I don't feel like I can enter into this story of Doubting Thomas without thinking at least some about what it would have been like to journey with Jesus. I often wonder how often those first followers were uncomfortable, especially in the face of Jesus' teaching. And I recognize this might just be my own projection, a reflection of how challenged I am by what he taught. But love your enemies, give to anyone who asks of you. Everyone is your neighbor, and love your neighbor as yourself. These are important, profound teachings that I fail to live up to every day. And so I wonder if the disciples squirmed like I do. Or is it just that I come from a position of relative power and wealth that makes me squirm? And because most of those who followed him had nothing, it was easier for them to accept his teaching. I don't know. Or what about those parables? Even the Jesus Seminar believes that Jesus taught in parables. And the thing about parables is that they're lessons that keep on giving. Every time you look at them, you can find something new. They grow right along with you. And that's amazing. Obviously, it is an excellent teaching tool. But was it hard as a first follower to be stretched and grown like that every day? Did it feel like drinking from a fire hose? Did they ever feel like they ever got it and knew what he was up to? Or were they following along as best they could and always feeling behind? I wonder too about what the pace of life was like for those first followers, for those who followed Jesus in his time. The gospel writer of Mark likes the word immediately and tells this rapid fire story, but probably that means that he just skips the quiet, slow parts. Did they linger over meals, talking and laughing? Or was everything go, 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 like the midst of an advocacy campaign right before a legislative deadline? I suspect that it was the former, because I don't actually think you build a movement that lasts unless you work at the pace of human trust. And the pace of human trust is slow and requires a lot of talking and laughing and storytelling and meaning making and sitting around fires in quiet wonder. So I guess my questions really add up to, what kind of spiritual development happened to those who were following Jesus? Those first followers were members already of a profound faith tradition, one that Jesus was using and drawing from, and they were almost exclusively disenfranchised people without any reason to have faith or trust in the systems of the day. They were marginalized by their society. And that's another place where I have to be really careful to pay attention to the fact that I am not marginalized by my society, and I better be careful how I project. I think in some ways, marginalized people have an advantage in seeing what God is up to in the world, because God is always up to upsetting the status quo to allow more people to survive and thrive. And while that is very good news for the masses who are largely marginalized, it is threatening for those who are not. And those first followers were spending all their time with Jesus and with one another. And that feels like the very best setup for faith development. Jesus was incredibly well connected with the divine, probably a mystic, and he was ready and able to put the needs of others before his own. In my life, people like that have taught me so much. Frankly, patiently and with more ease than I'm projecting onto this story. But I imagine that following Jesus for a year would change everything. I guess I'm wondering this because of the easy way with which Thomas expressed his doubt to his fellow disciples. Because I think that that is the expression of a rather well-developed faith. We're going to consider here a few of the stages of faith development according to James Fowler and wonder about where in those stages the disciples were. But I want to give a few caveats to begin with. It could be easy to hear about stages like these and to try to characterize oneself as high as one can, and it could be tempting to deride others for being at lower stages. I hope it is clear that that is not the point, either of those things. I suspect that most of us move around between stages based on the level of stress we're under, the strength of the teaching we received on any given topic, the level of stress around us, or just the number of things we're trying to do at the same time. God is with people wherever they are. And while we do, I hope, want to develop as people of faith, part of that development is making peace with honesty about where we actually are and being peaceable about where others are without judgment. And I need to say that if you feel like you've moved backwards over the past, say, 15 months, then have grace with yourself. That means that you have been under unsustainable stress. According to Fowler, the least developed stage of adult faith is one that easily yields to authority and quietly pushes any conflicts in faith away in order to minimize any threats to faith. In order to grasp these stages, I think it might be instructive to see how the psalm might be heard, or the first line of the psalm might be heard from within each of the stages. The opening verse is, "How good and pleasant it is when kindred live together in unity." In this stage, the verse can be heard as an encouragement to keep the peace, quiet one's own questions, and silence the concerns of those who raise issues. The silence happening in the name of unity. Unfortunately, this understanding of unity has the impact of silencing people who are marginalized and preventing growth of both individuals and the whole. But it's easy to see how it can be heard that way. How good and pleasant it is when kindred live together in unity. So be quiet about issues and experience the good and the pleasant. Thomas, though, is well past this stage, and we can see that because he immediately questions the statement of 10 of his friends and faith companions. Like, as if it isn't any threat. He's just like, no, I don't believe that. The next level of adult faith development is characterized by angst and struggle, as the person takes responsibility for their own faith instead of just following. In this stage, there is greater nuance and open-mindedness and more potential conflict. How might people in this stage then here how good and pleasant it is when kindred live together in unity. I wonder if the word unity becomes more complicated here, or if kindred become subdivided. Is this a place where the unity of the kindred reflects similar thinking groups so that there are different areas of unity? Does the challenge to authority become a means of separation? I think there's other possible answers too. It is clear to me that Thomas is, at least at this stage, because he speaks his truth clearly and stands in his own integrity, whether anybody is with him or not. Although I think it's worth pointing out that he stays with the whole. And that might suggest that at its best, this sort of unity is large enough for everyone's integrity. The next level of adult faith seems to me to be the one that all of the disciples were in the midst of transitioning into after the death of Jesus. And this generally comes after a significant crisis. Fowler suggests midlife crises. And this one is called conjunctive faith. This is faith that can handle paradox and mystery. It can let go of pieces of tradition or faith from prior stages that just don't work anymore. It is a stage and a space where multiple truths can be held simultaneously without conflict, which is good because that's what the Bible sounds like. So how very good and pleasant it is when kindred live together in unity be heard here. Perhaps this is when unity becomes about seeking each other's well-being, regardless of difference of perspective or differences of need. Because unity doesn't require similarity, only love. And love flows from God. I can't really tell if Thomas or the rest are in this stage yet. I still think they were probably growing into it. And this is a story of that transition. This is, after all, a story remembering that different people have different experiences, and rather than all the value going to those with greater experience, there's this acknowledged blessing of the ones who follow without the experiences. Because this is a story that anticipates us, the ones who did not experience the first resurrection, and yet celebrate it. There is, for Fowler, a rare final stage of adult faith development. One that neither those in this story nor most people of faith reach. I suspect that most of the disciples reached it by the end of their lives, and I further suspect it is what John Wesley was talking about when he suggested that people could reach perfection in living God's love during their own lifetimes. I think that people in this final stage would hear how very good and pleasant it is when kindred live together in unity, and immediately grasp that kindred is universal. And unity comes when all the people have the peace that comes after the needs of justice have been met. Was it because the disciples had time with Jesus that they reached the final stage? Was it because they lost Jesus and had to find the ways to go on? Was it both? Was it neither? It is unknowable. As United Methodists, as followers of John Wesley's teaching, we are taught about that idea of reaching perfection, of living God's love during our lifetimes. We hear it said as going on to perfection, and most frequently it serves to make me sad because I see how far I am from that goal. And yet, when I slow down enough to listen to the voice of God, I hear God saying that I don't have to be there yet. God hasn't actually asked me to be there yet. Rather, I'm asked to be where I am and to be open to the next means of grace that will help me walk the next steps of my journey. And that seems fair because God is a just God, and God doesn't ask of us more than we can give. And what we can give is based on who we are today and where we are on our faith journey. Which means, I guess, that I'm back to the metaphorical journey with Jesus that I said I wasn't preaching about. And I'm encouraging you to think about how your journey is going and what the next steps are. And to check with you to see if you need any help along the way. Because I can think of no clearer role for the church than to be the people who help each other as we move along our journeys with Jesus. Or in other words, we help each other move on to perfection. May God help us all. Amen.